Awesome. Well, so I guess just to introduce you, Josh, to everybody, you are, I guess, the founder of Freeman Lovell, and you guys are primarily business and real estate attorneys. Is that right?
Correct. Yep. Yep. I focus mostly on businesses and business owners, and my partner Steve, the Steve Lovell, the other half of Freeman Lovell, he focuses his practice mostly on real estate. So our names are divided, and we kind of divide that way too.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate you spending some time with me. There's been probably in no other time in my career more change, more information out there, more first times of things going on. And I think for small business owners, there's a lot for them to think about right now.
Absolutely.
And so I wanted to guess, collaborate with you and brainstorm about some things that business owners maybe should be thinking about or questions they should be asking themselves because this is such an unprecedented time.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of business owners very candidly are in survival mode, right? They're just kind of saying, hey, how are we going to get through this thing? But I think that in any time that there's a lot of change, there's also a lot of opportunity.
Yeah.
And I think that maybe as we work with business owners as advisors and coaches, we're starting to ask some very specific questions to business owners to ask themselves. And I'd love to, I guess, ask some of those questions with you and get your input because I think you have a very unique perspective on it. So, I think the first question around that business owners should be asking themselves is, okay, what's next, right? What will need to change as we move into the new normal, as they say, right? Which nobody really knows what that looks like. And part of the question I think there is, what will stay the same? Because if we know what's going to stay the same, then we know that what doesn't fit in that box is going to need to change, right? In your perspective, Josh, what are you seeing out there? What do you think is the new normal, or what's next?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, and I think the hardest thing with that is the new normal is going to look differently for different types of businesses, in different areas, and so the new normal for me, our law firm, we've primarily been practicing law, remotely, and a lot of us work from home or from different places and things that way. So the new normal for our law firm, as far as how we do work, it doesn't change much if we're stuck in a long-term, kind of social distancing situation, but what does change for us is, some of the ways that we can serve, our clients, and trying to find different offering types that provide different, ways for them to interact with lawyers, to receive legal services. So that's kind of an example from my industry, but I've been talking with, restaurant owners or, other business owners. And it's interesting because each of them have kind of a different answer to, kind of what they see when they look into their crystal ball for the future. But one of the regular, things that, comes out in these conversations is that real estate use and planning for how you have your workspaces is going to change, and it's kind of an interesting thing because, on places like restaurants or places that require people to come in, it's an interesting problem because in order for them to service the same number of clientele, they're going to need to expand their real estate footprint. They're going to need more spaces between tables, more spaces between desks, or those kinds of things. And so on one hand, I've talked to clients who are like, yeah, now we feel like we need to have more real estate, and then the other side of that normal is people realizing that, hey, we don't necessarily have to bring people together so much. I've had a number of people reach out to me and say, hey, you guys have been practicing virtually and running your business virtually, and we got forced into it and realized it's not as bad as we thought it was, and they've been wanting to talk it through with us and find out kind of what we found works and what doesn't work and how that. And so So I mean, I think, part of it, so that's kind of one of the common things. But as far as how this impacts each industry, I think different industries are going to be impacted differently. But I do see a move, a, less crowded spaces, obviously, and more, virtual events, more virtual interactions, and less forced in person, meetings and things like that. And we'll see what happens over the next couple of years. The other conversation that's come up has a lot to do with like businesses realizing that they've structured their entire business plan around the assumption that they're going to be able to continue to do business as they've always done in the past, that they would either have in-person meetings or different things like that, or realized that with the changes that have happened, their previous revenue centers and things like that aren't necessarily going to be the same as before. And so another conversation we've had on kind of, it's essentially something that stays the same, but I think is going to become more and more necessary, is figuring out how to diversify within your own industry the types of ways you deliver your services or your products, or those kinds of things, because different people are going to have different appetites for in-person interactions versus virtual interactions, and and the ways that those things are delivered. And so rethinking how you deliver what you do, and is something that I think we'll see a lot of people doing, and finding better ways to follow that advice of diversifying how you do your business, and diversifying the revenue, your streams of revenue into different ways. That way is something that's going to provide some stability. But yeah, those are some of the conversations I've been having with clients.
I'm glad you brought that up. I think that as we look at it, the only thing that's constant is change. And in my area, I mean, that's something we're always planning on. And I think that as we move forward, what I'm definitely realizing that is an ace in the hole, if you will, is the ability to pivot and move, right? If you've got, as you mentioned, a business plan or something like that, that is just kind of hardcore, one area, one way of doing business, that's a little bit higher risk level right now, I think, because as I've talked to local governments and people, they're saying, hey, this might be the first wave, or we just don't know how these things are going to work in the future. And so even if you survive the first wave, I think most business owners should be saying, hey, if this is the new normal, as people are talking about, is my business model effective, or do I need to change and pivot? And I think leverage is a big deal right now. I was mentioning this to a friend of mine in New York, and he was saying, if you've got a lot of leverage right now, cash is king. Can you survive some of these lean times? And if you do make it through the first one, it's time to really sit down and say, hey, this realistically, could happen in the fall again. We could reemerge and then have another wave. And so I think really taking a look at not only the structure, but also your capital structure, right?
Yep.
And just the ability to change and pivot and move. And some of these businesses, that have always kind of been, like you mentioned, the mom and pop kind of store that's very personal interaction. I think that we're realizing that a lot has changed, but also for the better. I'm glad you mentioned, a lot of these companies are saying, hey, we went virtual because we had to, but it's not as bad as we thought. And I know me personally, I've been working from home now for about 9 weeks, but I save probably 2 to 3 hours of driving time a day into being more productive, or even spending more time with family or doing other types of things. So I think that it's just a really great opportunity to just stop and take a breath and say, okay, what has changed? What's going to stay the same? And what do we need to possibly change in order to become even more viable or take advantage of it, right? Yep. So it's super interesting. I think kind of leading into that next question is, I think every business owner out there maybe needs to look out and say, what are the new opportunities that the new normal will present for our business, right?
Yeah.
And I don't, like you mentioned, it's going to be different for everybody. But it would be really interesting to see, the differences between, the restaurant owners. Now, all of a sudden, we were talking to a company who used to do catering for large events. And they were saying that now people want to do virtual events. So how do we get the food to the people? And they're actually teaming up with some of these food delivery
Mm-hmm.
services. And so literally what they're doing is you could have like a webinar like this with, 15, 30 people, and everybody actually gets their food delivered to them,
Mm-hmm.
and you're sitting at your home,
Yep.
which is a really kind of a unique idea. But when you think about venue costs and all the other, things that go along with it, it's actually something that is a viable idea that probably 6 months ago we wouldn't have thought of before, right?
Yep. Yeah. We used to do monthly in person, like firm lunches, and since this happened, that's exactly what we've done. Is we've essentially just said, hey, everybody, hop on DoorDash and order your own lunch, and then we'll hang out and talk, and and then submit reimbursements to the firm. And I mean, what you're talking about is taking it another step, where you're kind of providing part of that experience. But yeah, that's yeah, exactly right. You start thinking of different ways to do it, and yeah, it's interesting. Um, no, yeah, the new normals, an interesting concept, and I think, I think, one of the things to realize right now is, like you were talking, is cash is going to be king for quite a while, and there are a lot of companies that have lived paycheck to paycheck, and those companies are going to have a really hard time right now. And so, I mean, I think there will be a lot of opportunities out there for those people who are properly capitalized, to be able to take advantage of some of the companies that are struggling, and whether that's creating partnerships, and using your capital to leverage yourselves into a good position, whether that's acquisitions and buying other businesses. But yeah, I mean, there will be a lot of deals out there with companies that haven't managed their capital and haven't managed their businesses very carefully, because they've been riding a wave of really good economic times for a long time. That's going to come up. And so I mean, I think that's something that smart business owners are going to be paying attention to, that once you get past the survival phase of I have what I need for me to survive, to get into that expansion phase, there's going to be a lot of opportunities there. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, and I think the hard thing that most business owners have a difficult time grasping, right, is that business owners and entrepreneurs, it's kind of based on like an idea and a hope, and you want to go out and you want to build something, you want to do something big, and it's not in our mindsets to say to ourselves, how do I take advantage of a bad situation, in the sense that, like, okay, yesterday my company was worth $5 million, $10 million, and today it's worth zero, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do I take that situation and make something good out of it? And because most of it's just survival. But we were actually talking about a couple of ideas like that. And, I think it's a great time for a lot of companies to be in contact with CPAs
Mm-hmm.
and accountants and say, hey, valuations right now are really down. What can I do? Or is there something I should be considering doing? Whether it be, harvesting my losses, whether that be in a portfolio or in business structure, right? I was talking to some estate planning attorneys, and they were like, hey, maybe if we've got an estate planning problem, and all of a sudden, if we did an appraisal today and a company's worth a tenth of what it was, maybe it's time to move it outside the estate,
Mm-hmm.
and then rebuild it, outside the estate. A lot of things like that, but entrepreneurs and all of us business owners that are at the front, we're just focusing on, hey, we got to get things back online, and we might miss a huge opportunity to avoid a ton of taxes, or take advantage of some planning moments.
Yeah.
And that's why I think that as we kind of make a list of these questions, it makes sense. As we've talked to business owners, we've said, hey, have you thought about this? They're just like, oh, like, we haven't, but maybe we should.
Yep.
And just taking a minute to say, hey, things are down right now, but what does that mean for me? What opportunities are there, right?
Yeah, yeah, and we've seen that too. Kind of like you're talking about harvesting losses or moving business out of the states. We've had a number of businesses who have found themselves stuck in like an S corp or a C corp taxation and have wanted to move that out into like a partnership or other pass through type entity. And while that like tax valuations are low, this has given people opportunities to do so in a much less painful manner. So yeah, you're exactly right. It is a good time to revisit and review corporate structuring, especially if you've been, kind of concerned with, the efficiency of where you are and what you're trying to do. But yeah, absolutely. Great time to talk to CPAs and yeah, figure that out.
And really kind of get your professional team together and get people talking about it, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It was interesting. I was talking to an estate planning friend of mine, and he just said, I get a lot of people calling me right now because they think they're worried about dying, right? They're actually thinking about COVID and how they might affect their personal health. But, some of these other questions I think are really key for gifting and other things.
Yeah.
I think one of the planning tools that we've been using with business owners is the traditional thing of just kind of making a list, right? And one of them is, what are maybe 2 or 3 obstacles that you need to overcome right now in order to not survive, but to thrive, right? And again, kind of changing that mindset to just getting through this, to taking advantage of opportunities and those types of things. Are you seeing anything out there right now as far as like, obstacles that people really have in their crosshairs that they're having to focus on to take care of something like that?
I mean, yeah, no, that's an interesting question because, yeah, I mean, I think the primary obstacles, because the opportunities, I mean, the first obstacle I think is being able to change your mind shift. And I've thought a lot about Netflix. I mean, it's a pretty obvious example, but going beyond kind of what they did to the Blockbuster, right? I've been thinking about that because what's been interesting in watching their evolution is they started at first by challenging the Blockbusters of the world by saying you don't need real estate to get DVDs and videos, right? We'll just ship them to your door. And so they started doing that, and then they realized and made the pivot of we're not going to be a DVD shipping company. We're going to provide, these DVDs online for streaming. And so they started becoming, the streaming platform, right? And, and at first it was just a bunch, they'd go out and get licenses from the big movie studios and, other content owners to provide television and, and those shows on their, on the Netflix platform, and then a few years ago, they started to see, the shift in the market again and realized, we're not going to survive if we are just a licensor or a licensee of other people's content. But if we're going to really make this go, we need to become the content owner and the content producer, and we need to become a studio ourselves, essentially. And then they started creating their own films and creating their own television and all of those things, like a Warner Brothers or a Disney or whatever. And and they continue to have the movies and things that way. But watching them kind of like change and transition into what they've become is really interesting, and I think really illustrative for business owners to do, is to see times like this and see what's happening in their industries and rethink what they're providing and what their role is in the industry, and looking for what's the next step to take this even a step further. And so I mean, I think first you need to kind of step back out of your business a little bit and go, what is my business really about, and how can and what can I do to provide the type of service and benefit that I'm providing to our clients and to the customers and people who know and trust me, in a new and better way. So, and then you can start to see that vision, of, okay, what am I really doing and how can I do this? And then from there, I think the other obstacles are, in this economy. Number one, you got to make sure that you don't, like over leverage yourself, with,
Yeah.
with these growth plans and things like that. You got to make sure that you're on a solid financial footing and that you're, attacking these things in a sustainable way. And so, taking time, to make sure and understand your financials, where your money's coming from, where your money's going, and doing all of that is super important, and working with your financial team to do that, and then, once you can kind of, get rid of some of your own fragility, then it opens you up to pursue some of these more aspirational sort of things, and find ways to do that. And so, I think, I mean, those are, I think, are the kind of the obstacles right now. And so again, if you can, if you have the capital and if you have the vision, I think there's going to be no shortage of opportunities that come up. You just need to probably reframe what your role is in the marketplace a little bit, and find ways to expand into a broader role and a broader vision, of what you can be.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it's interesting that, in that forward looking phase, because a lot of what I'm a huge fan of is stress testing, right? Mm-hmm. We build a model, we build a business plan, whatever that might be. And then the key is to stress test it. Mm-hmm. And we found that most really successful families and business owners are actually running a stress test about once a year. And the reason that they do that, and we're talking about people that are probably have a net worth of about 500 million or more. Mm-hmm. But there's the interesting thing about it is that the same rules apply. The reason that they do it is because they're saying, hey, if we find a weakness or, something like that, when you have that size of a business, it could mean tens of millions of dollars, right? But the same thing applies to the entrepreneur that's worth $1 million or 2 million, whatever the case might be. And the interesting thing about it is that as we learn from, things that happen, well, that's where we get the stress test from, right? So for example, before 9/11, if somebody would have asked yourself, what happens if somebody flies a plane into a building, they probably would have looked at you like you were crazy, right? Yeah. Like, why are you even thinking about that? But now the same thing applies. If 6 months ago, somebody would have asked me, well, hey, what are we going to do if somebody in China, gets a virus and all of a sudden the entire world economy is shut down? I probably would have looked at them and been like, where did you get that idea from, right? Yeah. But now it's a reality. Now it's something that we have to deal with. And so it's interesting to stress test. And when you find these new opportunities to look at your business structure and your plans and your capitalization and all that stuff, we've got to be asking ourselves these questions now, because it is a new norm. As I've talked to our elected officials in the great state of Utah, they're very open right now that they're like, hey, we could go from, yellow back to orange or orange back to red. And they might even target very specific areas, which, again, you got to kind of take a look at those things. But it is fascinating to see that stress test at work, and always questioning and improving, because that's what you're doing when you stress test, is you're improving, right?
What kind of things have you seen the companies do as part of these stress tests? I mean, what are some of the things they're looking at and concerned about?
I think a lot of them, so there's kind of like 3 major areas that I think a lot of this applies to. One of them is risk management. And it's fascinating to me how quickly some attorneys can move. But in one of the organizations that we're affiliated with, they're already receiving lawsuits about somebody who might have contracted COVID-19 at your place of business.
Right.
And I'm like, you got to be kidding me, right? Like, the courts, I think, for the most part, are closed, but the lawsuits have already started to be filed. And so, again, 6 months ago, I don't think we ever would have said, hey, let's look at our P&C policies and our business structure in case somebody gets a disease at our business. Like, it wasn't even in our mindset, right? Yeah. So that's a big area. Tax mitigation is a huge area. Again, I don't think most of our successful business owner clients would have said 6 months ago, hey, if my company valuation drops 80% in the next 6 months, what are we going to do? Yeah. So you got to be able to move and pivot. And so there's just a lot of, I think, it's a weird thing. I'm not excited about like, what's going on from the sense of there's like this virus out here that's causing a lot of problems. But when you look at it with a different mindset and you really change it to say, hey, how can we take advantage of this? What opportunities are there? It does kind of get a little exciting, right? Like maybe there's some really big stuff we could do for companies. A lot of them right now are looking at these paycheck loans that are being issued, the stimulus from the government. And I've heard from some that, they ran out and they got the money right away. And all of a sudden they're like, oh my gosh, like, I don't know that I realized what I just signed up for.
Right.
And that's, where I think it's a huge value to have a good team behind you, good attorneys, good accountants, that when all of a sudden maybe your staff comes to you and say, hey, we've applied for all these loans and we just got $500,000 or $1 million, whatever the case may be, you understand what you just signed up for and kind of how to play by those games. So those are kind of the biggest things we're seeing right now, as well as, the markets. The markets are a fascinating thing right now that, again, 6 months ago, when, you're looking at planning with your capital stack or whether, your investment portfolio, you weren't even thinking about this kind of stuff. Now we're really taking steps to mitigate risk in very fast moving markets. And I think what's really cool is to watch people evolve and the technology that's evolved. And I think that's, one of the questions that we're asking business owners right now is, okay, well, what resources do you have available to you right now? Right. And I think when you say resources, it kind of comes up in several different areas. You have, obviously you could say capitalization, right? Like what are banks willing to do for you? Banks are overwhelmed right now. Everybody's contacting their bank, whether they need help or not, because people are saying, hey, will you work with us, whether on deferrals or, those types of things, or they might be applying for new loans. And those things are out there, but I think you need to be very careful, again, with those things. Biggest resource, I think, that maybe companies, as their professionals, right, that they're surrounding themselves with, that they can bring a team together and say, hey, I have no idea about these complex issues, about lawsuits or about, those types of things. Help me understand, what are we dealing with? And I think those businesses are going to be the ones that really thrive going forward because they're taking steps to completely change maybe the way they approach it.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's right. Another resource I've kind of noticed is, for the past 2 to 3 years, a lot of our technology clients would reach out to us and they're just like, do you know any good, coders, developers, engineers, anything? And I'm like, your guess is as good as mine. It's, it's just super, super hard. But with, a lot of the like layoffs and other things that have happened, there's a lot of talent out there right now, and there's a lot of really good talent that's available. And so there's more human capital and human resources available out there, and given the circumstances, there's more people in positions to to take risks, to take lower salaries in exchange for equity and other other more flexible approaches, because they may not have a better alternative right now. And so I mean, there's going to be a lot of there's a lot of entrepreneurial opportunities out there to, potentially find people who've been, working for some really hot startup for the last 5 years that have found themselves without a job, that have skills to potentially build something pretty incredible that, you'd never have a chance to bring onto your team to develop that technology solution you've been thinking. And, and they may be willing to do it, at much more affordable rates and, potential, equity splits and other things that way to make it, more doable. And so, there's a lot of opportunities there.
Yeah, and again, it's that mindset, right? It's kind of interesting because I think if the majority of business owners that we work with right now, if I said, hey, if you run a want ad for employees, they'd be like, what are you talking about? We're trying to just keep things moving. But hey, you throw out a fishing lure and maybe there's somebody out there that you've really been wanting, or you have some talent that you've really been needing and you had no idea they were even in the market, right?
Yep.
I think that's a great, way to look at it. And the other question would be, technology, right? Like, how can you leverage technology now, maybe that you haven't done before.
Mm-hmm.
I think the one that's really just come through now is like even Zoom. We're on Zoom right now, right? And I've talked to some people in New York and across the country, and they're like you said, I don't think I need an office anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And traditionally speaking, especially in the big cities where it's downtown Salt Lake, or you want like really nice Class A office space, that's a huge expense. And what they're finding is that even the older generation, people in their, let's say, 60s and 70s that are in the retired phase, they're even figuring out how to use Zoom and other video conferencing things to move their business forward.
Yep.
And they were forced into it in a sense, but all of a sudden productivity is going through the roof because people are seeing their employees possibly more now than they were, previous to the pandemic, right?
Yep.
And so, technology is a great thing, but sometimes, at least me personally, sometimes I don't want to necessarily, I don't want to be on the cutting edge and frontier, but when you're forced to use it, all of a sudden you're like, oh, I should have done this forever ago, right?
Yep.
What other major things are you guys seeing in technology for companies that they can leverage it?
I think an interesting, it's probably still a few years out before it's widely adopted, but I think virtual reality and augmented reality is going to be really, really interesting. I have a number of clients in the event space. And so, and there are a lot of limitations as far as interaction on a Zoom type platform that they're seeing virtual reality or augmented reality to be able to provide a better, more realistic form of interaction. And so I think there's going to be some interesting things to come out with that, where it's not just going to be for gaming and those types of things, but to provide a more human-like meeting experience and, other things like that. And so I think that's an interesting industry to kind of, keep an eye on and to watch. I mean, anything that's going to be, well, I guess I'm operating under the assumption that we're probably in this some form of social distancing lifestyle, at least for another couple of years and maybe indefinitely. But if that's the case, I mean, anything that is going to provide a replacement or something more like human to human interaction, I think is going to be an area where people are going to be putting a lot of thought and a lot of resources behind. Because that seems to be the biggest craving right now is to have a more, a more personal type conversation where you feel even more like you're sitting down in the same room or doing something together.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
so yeah, I mean, I don't know. I see that as kind of an area where we'll probably see a lot of move, and we'll probably continue to make, businesses operate, the way they are today.
Right. Right. And it's interesting. I was golfing the other day with a client of mine. We were 6 feet apart for sure. But
Oh yeah.
Well, we went out when we were golfing, and we were just talking about this new normal that we're in. And I asked him, I said, hey, what have you learned? How are you going to change what you do for your business? And I was really kind of expecting some of these conversations that you and I are having, technology or, employees or all these types of things. And I was kind of surprised by the comment that he made. And he just said, for over 30 years, I've been building my business. I've been working 60 to 80 hours a week. And this pandemic forced me to close my business at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So he'd come in at 8 and he'd leave at 1. And he said, I've been spending more time with my family, and I've been golfing more, things like this. And he said, you know what? I need to get back to it. I need to change some of where I've been spending my time and where I've been spending my money and shift a little bit. And I kind of thought about that. I think that it is a great opportunity to also take a look at the personal side. and
Hmm.
to just say, hey, with some of these changes in technology or things like that, maybe I can get a lot more done in a shorter period of time and or be more mobile. I've
Yeah.
talked to a couple of business owners. One of them is doing a great job, but he has this huge fifth wheel RV with satellite internet. I talk to him on a regular basis, and he's in a different part of the country all the time.
Hmm.
And he was explaining to me that he was kind of forced into that position, I think, or I shouldn't say forced, but it was a decision that was an opportune moment for him. But he's like, hey, as soon as I hang up on the phone with you, I'm going to go in my kayak. I'm going to paddle out on this lake in Florida, and next week we're going to be in this spot. But who would have thought, right? Sometimes you just need something to make you stop and think about, where am I spending my time? What are
Yeah.
my values and goals? Because sometimes, like all of us, we just get busy. My family's been that way. We traditionally travel across the country on a regular basis, competing in fencing,
Hmm.
and all of the competitions have been stopped, both nationally and internationally. And all of a sudden, we're like, we have all this time on our hands. Like, what are we going to do? And we've been spending more time, going on little road trips. We're not flying right now at all, right? We don't want to fly. So we're going back to those things where I did when I was a kid with my family. I mean, we used to jump in the car and we would road trip somewhere. We'd go camping, or we'd, do something like that. So I think also from a business owner standpoint, it's important to take that time to just say, hey, and what about my personal life?
Hmm.
And because I think that we can do a lot more and achieve it. So kind of a different twist on it, I guess.
No, no, no. It's so true. I know my wife and I were just talking about all of that, and and discussing how if uh, if we have another resurgence in the in the winter, how we're going to be dying to try to find somewhere warm to be able to go, because being pent up inside all that time is just brutal. And so I think we'll see you know a lot of people more like your friend with that RV trailer, and kind of traveling around and finding the spots that are going to provide you know uh uh the lifestyle that they want to. And there's going to be more more weather chasing, I think. But yeah,
Right.
it's really interesting.
Yeah, it's super cool. Well, let me shift gears on you real quick, little bit, Josh. There's one other area. So we've kind of been talking about like the business, right? Where we're going to take the business in our personal lives, all that kind of stuff. I think one area too that business owners should be thinking about right now is their clients. And the reason that I say that is I recently read an interesting survey that a lot of people are rethinking who they use for their professionals and their relationships, right? So one friend of mine is in the insurance industry, and she mentioned to me, she said, hey, I'm getting a lot of phone calls right now. It's really interesting, and people are wanting to go over their policies, and they wanted to go over all this stuff, and they're reevaluating everything. I said, well, why is that? And she goes, they have time to think about it, right? They're sitting at home and they're saying, hey, am I doing the right things? And I think that applies to all of us, and whoever your clients are, like, right, like your clients are sitting with a lot of time on their hands. And I think one thing that business owners should probably be asking themselves is, hey, what are you doing to ensure that your clients stay with you and that you're relevant to your clients, because they're doing the same thing. They're reinventing the wheel, going through everything. What are some of your thoughts on that, Josh?
Yeah, yeah, no, that's a really good point. And I think a lot of it is about kind of building a community of the people around you, and your clients and the other professionals, and and being more involved and part of what everyone's going through, and and providing resources, and and kind of in sharing in the difficult times with everyone, and just trying to take the opportunity to connect with with them on an individual basis, and and re-understand what their pain points are and what they're going through and the struggles their businesses are facing and their families are facing, and and try to help provide resources to not just help with whatever area that you are involved in, but also provide them resources to help them on a more holistic level. But yeah, it's hugely important to build that relationship and to have it mean more than just providing some service or some product or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think maybe for you and I mean, I think our businesses tend to be consultative by nature.
Mhm.
But as people's needs change, you're absolutely right. Communicating with them and finding out, hey, what's changed for you, and what are you dealing with, and being a resource to your clients. Because otherwise, if you were the old saying, if you were a horse and the buggy whip maker, the manufacturer, and you wake up one day and everybody's moved to cars, you might have missed that wave. And now's one of those pivotal times where people are reevaluating everything, and who they're working with, and what their needs are.
Yep.
So, staying relevant to clients, listening to their needs, and then I think listening to your clients will also help you understand a really good point about where your business could go.
Mhm.
If all of a sudden you talk to your top 10, 20 clients and they're all kind of saying the same pain points, if you can develop the solution to that problem, you might carve out a new niche for yourself or a new division of your company that you hadn't thought of before. And so spending time, whether it's on the golf course or whether it's through a virtual meeting like this, 10, 20 minutes with your clients will make a huge, huge difference.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
So, well, I mean, what else do you think is important, Josh, or what are you seeing out there that business owners, maybe should just take a breather and think about during this particular time? Is there anything else that we haven't talked about?
I mean, something I mean that we've been talking a lot with a lot of business owners and things is that going into a recession period, typically the rates of lawsuits and those kinds of things go up significantly. I mean, you mentioned,
Right.
Clients being sued over COVID-19, that sort of a thing. But when times are worse and money is tight, people start fighting over things that in the past, when things are going really well, they might have just been like, it's not that big of a deal. We're doing great on these other fronts. And so,
Right.
I mean, one aspect of preparing to go into recession is what you talked about on that risk mitigation, reevaluating insurance, making sure you have the right insurance policies, but also making sure your coverage limits are good. And then the other thing is to take a look at the contracts that you have and be proactive about if there's something in those or in a relationship with a client or something like that, trying to resolve those before it comes to a head, and being aware of those early on is going to help you prepare and find opportunities to mitigate that risk. And so tackling potential problem areas, auditing, your risk profile, both from a insurance and legal perspective, is something, it would be a really important kind of stress test type piece to include in a business plan right now. Um, but, um, but yeah, I mean, there's so many awesome opportunities out there. There's a lot of really great things going on amidst all of this difficulty. And so I think it's going to be a time, kind of like the old Charles Dickens, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, kind of concept, where there's a lot of really great things happening and a lot of really hard things happening. And if we can stay aware of both of those, we can, have an opportunity to really help a lot of people. And so that's kind of what we're excited about right now.
Yeah, and I second that a ton. I think that again, the people that have their heads up and they're looking around for opportunities, they have that forward moving mindset, are going to do well. And I think the hardest thing for an entrepreneur, I think, as we work with them, is that there's so many moving pieces, right? Like you can't be an expert in property and casualty and business structure and capitalization and your product and your clients and the sales. You really need a good team that should be asking, I think, these questions with you, right? And working together, because it becomes overwhelming.
Yep.
For an entrepreneur just to be dealing with being quarantined and surviving, let alone doing this kind of work. I think your team is key. And, those are the questions that your team should be bringing to you.
Yeah.
So a couple of things to kind of, really think about. But I agree. I think that the opportunities that are out there are actually really exciting from several different aspects, but we just have to be able to kind of click that, come out of the survival mode and go into how do we thrive.
Yeah.
Is definitely key. So what I thought might be helpful, Josh, I wrote down some notes as we were talking here, but maybe just a recap of the questions that you and I have brought up together, and hopefully that just kind of refreshes it. But, number one, what's next, right? What will need to change and what will stay the same? I think that's the fundamental starting point of any business right now. Number two, what are the opportunities that the new normal will present to your business? Great opportunity to sit down with your team and talk about that. What are 2 to 3 obstacles that you have to overcome to thrive, not just survive, but to thrive? And what are the resources that you have access to right now to help you move forward? Number 5, how can they leverage technology to grow your business now, right? And then the 2 other points about looking, so that's kind of looking outward about where you're taking your business. 2 questions to maybe look inward and just saying, hey, what are you doing to ensure that your clients stay with you and that you are relevant to your clients? And have you talked with your clients to make sure that you actually understand their pain points and what they're going through rather than just making that assumption? I think that with a really good team surrounding you, and if you actually go through those questions and spend some time with people that you trust, I think that a lot of great opportunities will present themselves, and then you can make an action plan, move forward, and go execute on a really great opportunity.
Definitely.
Awesome, Josh. Well, thank you. I don't know if you have anything you want to add before we close up today, but
no, that was a magnificent recap. So,
all right. Well, we appreciate you guys and the advice that you give. I have to give props. I think that anytime that you work with a legal team like you guys that are willing to have these types of discussions, it's just kind of rejuvenating, for me anyway, because there are different types of attorney groups out there, but I found that you guys have been really great just to brainstorm ideas and talk about things and be open-minded. So again, I wanted to thank you for spending time with me and for your insights and for the clients that might hear some of that.
No, thank you. And that's what gets us excited about what we do is we love having these conversations with our entrepreneur clients and the other professionals surrounding them and being involved in the process of making their businesses better. And yeah, thanks, Richard. Thanks for giving me this opportunity to talk with you.
You bet.